MPs now have an allowance for their housing, 250,000 shillings every month, and of course some Kenyans are not happy with that. You were saying something just before you came on air, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua.
Thank you, Gituku. I think this headline is a bit alarming. Of course, naturally.
First of all, is it true?
Naturally, Parliament and members of Parliament are the boys to be whipped any time there is an issue. You know, so what is happening, Sam, is that deputy governors went to court because they had been denied the house allowance. And the High Court pronounced itself on the matter that the employer has a duty to house the employees and most of the state officers. You know, under the new constitution, members of Parliament are state officers, just like principal secretaries and cabinet secretaries. You are aware that the cabinet secretaries, principal secretaries, head of prostitutes, they have been enjoying that facility of being housed wherever they are working at their duty station. So the law has just been applied because the law is not selective. The law applies to everybody. You cannot have one law that says state officers should be housed, and then you single out members of Parliament.
One would argue that the law favors members of Parliament as opposed to, and the same thing is happening when nurses, teachers and doctors are also asking for an increase in their salaries.
I don't think so. I think every cadre of employees have been agitating for their terms of service to be looked at and they looked into, and that has been happening across. It's only that the members of Parliament cannot go to the streets. And the fact that they don't go does not discriminate them, that they cannot ask that what belongs to them. Okay. I think that is the issue, that as people who are elected, the scrutiny on their welfare is a bit on the higher side, in the sense that it's the people who employ them, and probably sometimes they feel that they're having too much. But I can tell you, I've been in Parliament slightly over a year, and what I have seen, you know, many colleagues, are in problems in terms of the demands from the electorate. You know, we are coming from a society where the people who elect members of Parliament have not accepted that their role is legislation and oversight. And they think their role is needed to take care of them. That is the reality on the ground.
Honorable Gachagua, that has been used as an excuse by many of you, that you said that the electorate expect you to dish out grants or be it contributions to fundraisers. But then again, one wonders, like Professor James Olekiapi is saying that this is the highest insensibility and disregard of the current situation in the country. This business of pampering elected leaders must stop. Maybe MPs are not living in Kenya. There's no money that can...
Professor Kiapi was a permanent secretary, and he drew a house allowance for the time he served. Let people not be hypocritical, and let people not, now that he's out there, talk like he has not been there. I would have loved to hear him denounce his house allowance when he was principal secretary for the Ministry of Education. Okay,
so the question I'm asking is, you look at the situation of the country and the pay that you have been receiving. Why did you have to go for this housing allowance, even as you insist that it's a right? Are you sensitive to the situation the country is going through?
First, I want to say that Kenya is a very rich country. It's only that we mismanage our resources. And as a second term in Parliament, I want to be very honest with you that whatever we do within the Commonwealth jurisdiction, other countries do. If you go to Zambia, in fact, where there are large countries, you find members of Parliament are housed in one block because they spend 3 days in the headquarters and then they go back to the constituencies. And the same thing happens here. There are very many members of Parliament who come from various parts of the country, don't have a house in Nairobi. So when they stay here in the between Tuesday and Thursday, they actually stay in hotels. Or you know some places they book, and I can assure you some really suffer because their families don't even stay in Nairobi. You have to be on your own here. And again, this is coming out of a court ruling that you know under the employment law and some of the things which could one could be able to benefit, some of the benefits. And I want to say maybe one may think it is high, but it is taxed. So when it is taxed, it gets a member of parliament a reasonable place to stay. As opposed to a member of parliament who, before coming into parliament, may have their own house.
Speaking of taxes, that's the same thing what Kenyans are asking. When we are a country that currently is in drought, we have high inflation, a big wage bill, public debt, the high taxes you're also talking about. One would say the time that this has come is quite insensitive towards Kenyans at a time when we're facing all those challenges as a country.
If there was no corruption in the country, Kenya has enough money to manage all its resources. It's all that we make a budget for a few corrupt individuals. If all the resources of the country were to be utilized properly, all the resources which have gone to the counties, all the resources in the country, I can assure you will be a first world country. Okay, all right.
You speak of taxes, and I want to bring the two of you to this conversation. 250,000, even if you tax it 30%, that's about 75,000. So you remain at the 175,000 take home in as far as what increment now you have. But when you look at that, even as you said that we have enough resources, I mean, how does that sit with the rest of Kenyans who are having to finance their own housing despite their meager allowances in terms of to cater for the same?
I want to agree with my colleagues. You know, rights and privileges. Any individual has a right to certain that has been provided for the Constitution, and that is why, in the wisdom of the court, they decided that members of parliament should be given house allowance just like other state officers. And it doesn't mean that when you are able, since it is your right, you can't be given. The law is very clear. As my colleagues have said, the courts have pronounced themselves that you cannot discriminate members of parliament since they are being employed by the people, and maybe because the issues of their welfare are being scrutinized by the public. And therefore it is a basic right, and every Kenyan has a right to. Even if today we have a president or a deputy president or any senior government official that is a billionaire or doesn't need the money, it doesn't mean that you can't pay that person salary simply because it doesn't need that money. Well, it is because it is the right, it is not the privilege.
That's true. There's no doubt about what you're talking about. The concern from Kenyans is that because of the challenges the country is going through.
Of course, the members of parliament...
No, just hold on. Is it possible for the members of parliament to be sensitive to that? Because they read insensitivity.
As members of parliament, we are doing a lot to ensure that the country moves in the right direction. We are doing a lot in terms of legislation. We are doing a lot that is provided within the purview of the Constitution.
It's not being
we can't police other things. We can't be police officers. Members of parliament are not police officers. Members of parliament are not the implementers. We do the oversight and legislation and protect the interests of both the national and county governments across the country. So I think the expectations that the public have on the members of parliament is what we have stretched in terms of what a member of parliament should be expected to do. And therefore, any member of parliament, just like any state officer, and I would wish that as we have this conversation, the country should be told that there are members of parliament, there are state officers that the other state officers do not hand the house allowance just like members of parliament. Then if everybody will be removed from the house allowance that are being given across the state officers, then we will agree as a country that some of this. But I want to agree with Dan Mahanso and the rest of my colleagues that we should be sealing leakages that are within the government, so that we can ensure that the country and the government is self-reliant to ensure that there is service delivery to the people. And I think that is very important for all of us.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Honorable Loch, just before you come in on this, I want us to combine this conversation with the progress made in the Big Four agenda, that is housing. Of course, there has been that contestation about 1.5% contribution by her as an employee as well as the employer. And during the Labor Day celebration, we had the trade unionists speak about it. Let's listen into what Wilson Sossion and Francis Atoli as well as Senator Moses Wetangula had to say about it.
We must review the CBAs to compensate any deduction, short of which hatutakubali. But once that is done, we will be willing to support the housing. Before it is done, we shall not support. That is a spirit of give and take. So tunaambia mwajiri, usiguze payslip mpaka tukae tumalize na CBA. Kama bunge hatujaona karatasi za serikali ambazo zinafafanua kinagaubaga masuala ya kukata pesa za wafanyakazi kupeleka kwa nyumba. Hiyo karatasi lazima iletwe bunge, ndio wabunge wajue huo mzigo tunaowekea wafanyakazi namna gani na tunaweza kuondoa namna gani. Na tukasema mambo ya housing, we want to enter into dialogue. Na sheria negotiation inasema you cannot negotiate with your employer under duress. Tukatoka kotini to negotiate. Na tukapropose, president iko na hiyo barua, kila mtu iko na hiyo. Tunataka 15% general wage increase. Wewe ukipata 15 kwa 100, Uhuru akitaka kutoa ya nyumba 1.5% is free.
All right, so those are the workers. All of you know about the Big Four agenda and the division that it has caused. And now a pay rise has come in terms of the housing allowance that you say is your right. So what do you tell Kenyans if you are to charge 1.5%? They are saying that they want a 15% pay increment. Is this a possibility in the current circumstances?
First of all, let's not mix the issues. I think the government is trying to promote one of the Big Four agenda. The manner in which they're doing it is what is contestable. I hear the speakers there to be saying, if I start with Senator Wetangula, I think he's mirroring what is in the Constitution, that nothing can be done that has the force of law without coming through Parliament. And for this to be able to have the force of law, I think government ought to have done consultation, public participation, and perhaps bring something in Parliament that we can be able to look at. I think the way they would do it, because maybe it seems to me like a revenue-raising measure in order to meet one of the Big Four agenda, they probably have to bring it in the budget. So we'll be looking at the estimates and the appropriation bill in terms of how are they going to bring it up. Number two is the formula itself. Is it tenant purchase? Is it to provide everybody uniformly with housing? And how many can they build? Because how many workers do we have? If they're 3 million and you're going to build only 500,000. So what is the equity of X number of employees paying for everybody when only some will pay? People back at home who live in mud houses, they're going to be footing the bill for people staying in urban areas to be able to stay. I think there is need to rethink the whole rationale behind this.
Do you agree with Wilson Sossion when he just said that if the housing levy is to happen, then a review of the CBA for compensation should happen? If doctors today, if nurses today, if teachers today ask for a review within their salary, would you vouch for that as well? The same way you vouched for your allowance?
First of all, I think the government is trying to raise money. So without taking sides on that issue, I think it would be defeatist to be saying we want to raise 1.5 and then on the other hand say give us an increment. It is perfectly within their purview to say, you know, as trade unionists, give us an increment because economic times are difficult. But the rationale cannot be that for us to pay 1.5, give us an increment. I mean, it's arguing in circles. On this issue about house allowance, number one, it's important to know that this is not something that MPs have just come up with. This money was factored into and passed in the last budget, if I'm not wrong. This is money that was in the 2018-2019 budget. I think what's told it is that we've had back and forth between the Salaries and Remuneration Commission and, of course, the court cases. The court has pronounced itself, like they said, that if there is a category of state officers, and MPs are state officers, they either all get house allowance or they all lose house allowance. That's point number one. Number two, members of parliament are entitled to mortgage, which they can take or not take. For example, he has said that he hasn't taken the mortgage. So to be able to discriminate and pick or cherry pick one set of employees, and even outside of the state officers themselves, you need to show me one category of employees in this country where one of the line items in their payslip is not house allowance. If you can show me that, then this conversation is closed. Let's have everybody not being paid, but you cannot pick pick members of parliament because it is fashionable and it is easy to inflame passions of members of the public when you put this. And the reason I'll demonstrate here very simply, and I've said it here before, members of parliament, and this is an entitlement, in the entirety of their budget consume less than 2% of the national budget. So if we are talking taxpayers' money, and let me be very clear, we all collectively need to be able to be sensitive to the tax burden of the people of Kenya. And that's what members of parliament do every day. The national government, that's the elephant in the house. Of the 100%, 1.3 trillion, 53 or so percent of it will go into government with all its wastages. And add on to that, 30-something% that goes into the contingency or consolidated fund. And nobody knows how that is used. In total, 83% of our budget runs into national government with all the wastage, 30% of which goes to corruption. You need to point a finger and point Mwananchi to the 83% that the executive sits on. Not the 2%.
Honorable Lodge, when you say that as an elected member of parliament, then a Kenyan wonders what are they supposed to do from their very little influence that they enjoy, because at the end of the day you will realize that yes, you're saying that it is your right. No one denies that. But the fact of the matter is the resources that are in the country are not sufficient for the services. Whether it's because of corruption or not, it is the fact. So how then do we move forward so that, yes, we take care of your interest, but at the same time, consider this Kenyan who is struggling to make ends meet in their lives?
Thank you. I think I want to agree what Mheshimiwa Oluoch has said very clearly, that we should be discussing about the wastages, and the elephant in the room has been always the executive. And some of the excesses of the...
you are the oversight.
No, we are doing our best, and that is why it is, as he has said, it is fashionable to pick by media and other stakeholders, because it is easy to bash members of parliament, so it is very easy to attack them. But if you look inside, we have been trying our best to try and do our oversight provided for within the constitution and the standing orders. And that is why, even for example, in the Senate and even in the National Assembly, there have been so many investigations to some of these issues that concern public, that the parliament has pronounced themselves on the way forward, and now that some of these things should be handled.
You talk about the law, but according to Stephen Mutoro, the Secretary General for COFEC, he was saying that they would move to court to bar this new award in terms of your allowance. Well, then how do you respond to that?
Of course, the courts have pronounced itself, but you know, if for the growth of legal jurisprudence, we would like to see how that will go in the courts of law.
But
the courts have pronounced itself.
That is called res judicata. Our court does not go back to an issue that has already settled.
And by the way, there has been no appeal on that matter.
Yeah, there has been
no appeal on that matter.
The courts have pronounced themselves on that matter.
Then how do you respond as lawmakers seated right here? Then how do you respond to Kenyans who say that you seem to be very quick when it comes to your own allowances and your own pay rise? When it comes to other things in the country, because you're saying that you're trying your best, that doesn't seem to be the case. If you are as efficient as you say you are, perhaps certain things like education, health, housing, as you mentioned, would be implemented quite effectively in Kenya.
But you know, members of parliament do not implement. It is the executive. Even if today we pass any legislation and any, in terms of budget estimates and everything, the executive will still have to implement.
Nevertheless, the same enthusiasm that you have for this, why are we also not seeing it when it comes to other things that matters, the drought, the corruption, and so forth?
No, I think the same enthusiasm is there, because when estimates are brought to parliament, the budget, it is approved on time. I mean, it's only that nobody wants to see that speed. It's there. And all matters that have been brought to parliament, for parliament to legislate and enable the government to function and to implement, are done on time. It's only that those issues are not sensitive. You know, when it comes to issues of money, money is a sensitive issue. And when we appropriate funds for development, and they're in billions, nobody's talking about it. It's only that this one is in a negative light, and you people with the media, you are really facilitators in creating that impression. Because like this...
But do you feel the concerns of the public?
Of course, there are many concerns of the public on this issue and on many other issues on a daily basis. And I think we continue listening, we continue propagating these issues appropriately within the law. But But this is a matter that is done by court.
All right.
Can I add something kindly?
Just before you do, just before you do, Grandmaster on Twitter is saying that he is responding to your comment about Kenya being rich. This is a terrible notion to throw around. Kenya isn't as rich as we think it is. He doesn't give the supporting evidence, but that's his view.
Can I add something? You ask something about what the parliament is doing. As we talk, this is the second parliament that is overseeing devolution. The other day, and this one should be on record, and the Senate has pronounced itself, that we have been trying to ensure we add more money to counties. And you imagine, in the last financial year, 314 billion was allocated to the counties. CS Rotich said that he would cut by 9 billion. We said we wanted 335 billion to go to counties. These are some of the reasons that we are concerned for Kenyans, because we want to increase resources that should go down and ensure that there is service delivery as per the fourth schedule on the functions that have been devolved. And therefore, if you ask, Parliament has been trying to appropriate more money through even counties, so that some of those services like healthcare, like bursary, like ECD, like feeder roads in areas, and many other aspects of service delivery will be provided by increasing more resources that go to mashinani.
Okay, all right. We want to take a short break, but when we return, we'll be talking about more issues, especially on the politics of the weekend, as well as the appointments that were made by the president for different positions. We'll be looking at that list and what it means for the future of the handshake. You can text us your views on 22422, or you can call us on 0719 777 777, or you can tweet us at Citizen TV Kenya, at Sam Gituku, and at Zinzi_Kenya.